everybody, it's April the Priest. I'm here to talk about mastering menopause today, and before that, for credits toward LMHF Wellness Program Part 2, you must watch this video in its entirety and comment on the video with your name. Once confirmed by LMHF, your comments will be removed. Alright, so today we are going, this is actually, excuse me, hide my phone. This is the first sort of time I've really touched this topic, and it's huge. So this is going to be really like the first sort of presentation that I give, and I will have subsequent ones where I get to expand a lot on each topic. So today we're just going to kind of warm ourselves up and dip our toes in the pool of understanding what is happening inside of our bodies and what that causes directly and indirectly. So menopause it doesn't get a lot of press. It's kind of like a word that people don't want to hear or talk about. And it's really tangled up in all of our body processes. So not just menopause, but just the changes in hormone production has so much to do with so many different things in our body that have nothing to do with having babies. So we're going to try to kind of untangle that stuff and take a look at how what was happening when we were younger in our cycles and how that sort of changes during perimenopause, and the changes that sort of also go along with it that really have nothing to do with being fertile or infertile. So we're going to talk about that. So the first thing that I want to bring up is, this is by no means an exhaustive list of health issues that are associated with this sort of time in our lives, but I'm going to come across some of the issues that we have, and we're just going to talk about ways to sort of try to ameliorate them, okay? And this is, again, just dipping our toes into this water. So we know that women tend to have disturbances in sleep and mood. Vasomotor symptoms, which are things like hot flashes and night sweats. Urogenital atrophy, osteopenia, and osteoporosis. Those things are really, really detrimental to our health, so we'll talk about that. Psychiatric issues, cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, which then can lead to obesity, dysregulated lipid metabolism, which goes with that. So all of our estrogen and a lot of our hormones are actually made from lipids. So what's going to happen when your body stops making estrogen out of those lipids? You have way more lipids that you have to do something with. And unfortunately, a lot of those lipids get stored as fat. So we're going to talk about that. A decrease in lean body mass. So there's something that goes on that we haven't really discovered that just causes our body's sort of muscle mass to decline. We just don't make as much. There are ways that we can make it make more. We have to force it, but left to our own devices, that will sort of go down. Our muscle mass will go down. When our muscle mass goes down, we lose coordination, we lose balance, and we lose the ability to burn calories at rest. So that's what decreases BMR, is basal metabolic rate. Our metabolic rate starts to go down, which means that you can, if you eat the same amount of food, you burn fewer calories, you store more fat. So we're going to talk about that as well. Certain cancers, which can be helped by certain things that you can do, lifestyle changes, and immune system issues. And this is kind of a big one that is being studied pretty heavily today. So we're going to touch, I said again, on strategies to help with all of these. And I'll be putting together some more really kind of direct nutrition, a presentation that has to do with, maybe some supplementation like herbs and things like that we can do to sort of help overcome some of these issues. The following discussion could really go on endlessly. I could talk about this forever because there's so many processes in our body that are affected by this. So we're really going to start off with some basic biology today, and it's going to be kind of generic, but it should really help us to understand what's going on. One of the things that I was really surprised about when I started doing this research like a little over a year ago was that when you read these papers, and you have these very prominent scientists, I have like over 200 papers, just going, and they all start off with this sort of notion that, well, women are always saying like that they're more tired, they're more hungry, they're more cranky, they have night sweats, they have this or that. They're gaining more weight. Let's investigate and see if this is real. Like, so we can say things, we can tell people what we've been experiencing, and the first thing that they're going to investigate is whether or not this is a real phenomenon. And well, maybe women are actually gaining weight because they're just lazy and they don't like to exercise. And you'll see, and I have all these sentences highlighted in these papers. I'm like, one says that, women are not averse to exercise, so we can have them try this. And it's just shocking to me. So with that, I'll dive into the definition of menopause. So I'm going to turn my page. It is really defined as the end of the fertile phase of women's lives. So once you've had your sort of last period 12 months ago, then we would consider that menopause. However, the time leading up to that, it could be 10 years, it could be 5 months, of your body sort of behaving wildly and irregularly is called perimenopause, that leads up to menopause. And that's when we start to see a lot of vasomotor changes, which is just, the body heat, night sweats, things like that. The fluctuating hormones, and we're going to talk about that. So here I have a slide that sort of looks at a normal fertile phase. And you have, day 0 through 28 is kind of like a very generic way of looking at it. But some of the hormones that we start to see are like something called FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone. And that starts to creep up right around ovulation when the egg is released. It points really high, and then it goes down and is down again for the rest of your 28 days. So it peaks right around 10 days, drops off right around 14 days. Follicle stimulating hormone is what your endocrine system uses to sort of develop an egg cell, okay? And that egg cell, once it starts developing, starts making estrogen. So that is the first time we really see estrogen. And then once FSH hits a certain level, we sort of turn it off. And luteinizing hormone comes off. And that hormone, right around the time of ovulation, gets the egg to sort of be released and get ready to go make a baby. But the little sac where it lived in the ovary, that's called a follicle, and it becomes something called a corpus luteum. I don't know why they changed the name of these things. But that little sac, the empty sac, then starts to make way more estrogen. So you have these two dips in estrogen. And a lot of times before women sort of hit perimenopause, they might notice that week leading up to their first day in their cycle, like sort of after ovulation, the third week of their cycle to the fourth week of their cycle, before they start the period, they might start to feel really lethargic. They start noticing different symptoms. So those weird fluctuations during perimenopause change even more, because sometimes for whatever reason your body might have to make way more follicle stimulating hormone to get those eggs to come out. And then you might have way high levels of estrogen or just no estrogen. And the lack of estrogen really causes a lot of other problems, and we're going to talk about that. So really what causes the sort of onslaught of all of this is this follicle stimulating hormone, because our bodies just start to make less and less of it. And at some point, it just stops making it. And so once that stops being made, because we don't want to make more new fertile or egg cells to be fertile, then we lose the estrogen. Okay, so that's what's happening there. And so that irregular phase, you start to see a lot of the symptoms that I talked about on the first page. And I'm going to go to the next slide where I get to just talk a little bit more about, with a little graph, we'll talk about what's happening in that ovary again. So follicle stimulating hormone comes out, it stimulates estrogen production from that little egg. The egg gets released, and then all of a sudden, the sac where the egg was starts making more estrogen again. Okay, so what happens? This decrease in follicle stimulating hormone decreases egg formation, and less estrogen and less progesterone will actually be produced throughout our cycles. So what does that mean? We have less estrogen, so what? What is so important about estrogen? So eventually, less estrogen doesn't just have to affect our fertility, all right? We've got estrogen receptors in our brain. It has to do with energy production. So there is a scientist who was looking at, say, mollusks like 100 years ago. Mollusks, they're like little slimy things that live in shells in the ocean, sometimes out, like a snail. Mollusks, which a lot of times are sort of asexual, like they have both parts, and so they can make a whole new animal unto its own. They have estrogen receptors, and they're not used in reproduction at all. Those estrogen receptors are used for energy production and energy transfer in their bodies. So that was really the first time I think that I've seen in papers that scientists knew that estrogen did something other in our bodies than just have to do with being fertile. So we know that they have a tremendous effect on where we're being able to get our energy and sort of pull energy into our body, how we're able to use it, sort of to harness it. Because let's say we could have a normal diet, but we wouldn't be able to access our energy maybe in our muscles. There's like a block there that can happen when we don't have that estrogen to bind to that receptor. So that would be like, I don't know, your car starter being broken, and now you keep trying to start your car and it's got gas in it and it's got everything it needs, but the starter's broken. So that's huge. Certain brain functions. So there are estrogen receptors all over your brain. Bone density is oftentimes tightly tied to estrogen. And many, many more processes in the body. So fat burning, we'll talk about that. So other things that estrogens do is prevent endothelial dysfunction. So they're really helpful in making new endothelial tissue. And that's just like your capillaries, your veins, your arteries. Just think your cardiovascular system. They prevent vascular inflammation and atherosclerosis. So again, cardiovascular. They regulate immune cells. That's huge. They regulate abdominal fat. So postmenopausal women are 5 times more likely to develop abdominal fat stores than premenopausal women. I'm just going to go make sure I'm ahead there. So that's big. What does that mean? So once again, I mentioned the first place. We're not making estrogen out of fat. Estrogen is also tied to sort of pulling fat to be burned as fuel. So if we don't have an estrogen receptor there binding to pull that fat out, it just kind of stays there. And it's a lot harder without ramping up your exercise to get it out of there. It also has to do, it'll mess up your glucose regulation. That fat abdominally oftentimes is what we call visceral fat. So it's not subcutaneous fat, which is like the kind you can pinch, which is just under your skin. Visceral fat lies around your organs, which is also tightly tied to diabetes. Which is another issue we tend to see with postmenopausal women. So huge. From there, it inhibits inflammation. It's like one of the most powerful anti-inflammatory hormones that we have. So really from here on out, I want to everything that I talk about, I want to talk about under the umbrella of inflammation. So inflammation is also tightly tied to stress, and our stress hormones start to kind of go wacky at this time as well. So everything that we can do to tamp our stress down and our inflammation down is kind of the umbrella that I'm going to be speaking under today. Okay? So, and then the last thing that I want to talk about, which by no means is the last thing that estrogen has to do with, is that it inhibits hunger. So there's a hormone called ghrelin in our body that usually once you've eaten enough food, your body will start to, your blood sugar goes up, your body has to put it away, your insulin's tired, and he's like, all right, I'm gonna go tap ghrelin and tell this crazy person to stop eating. And ghrelin says, stop eating, we're full. That hormone gets like he's like lost. He doesn't get nearly as much of a tap on the back. So that's really sad and scary. I feel like everything I talk about is going to be sort of depressing when we talk about this, but I'm going to get to some strategies to help afterwards. But this is really the reality. And I think what is important is that we understand that this is an uphill battle we are fighting. Like everything is changing and we have to make the most of it. And more importantly, it's not in our heads, which is quite interesting because that's what kind of the very first thing that a lot of these scientists are thinking is, oh, it's kind of in their heads, maybe they're just lazy. So I'm here to tell you that we're not lazy. You're not lazy. You are more tired and everything is harder, and I'm sorry, but we can do this, we can get through it together. So during perimenopause, estrogen and FSH are fluctuating, and this affects sleep. So we talked about everything being under the guise of inflammation and stress. We know that not sleeping enough or not getting at least 7 hours of sleep makes your stress hormone cortisol come out, and it also makes your blood sugar more difficult to regulate. And it also makes you feel hungrier. So you've got that going against you, and then you've got the sort of compound effects of estrogen deficiency. So what we know about this is that if during your fertile phase you notice that part of PMS is having trouble sleeping, that is going to be linked to having trouble sleeping during perimenopause and menopause. So you may want to consult like a sleep specialist, a sleep doctor, maybe a cognitive behavioral therapist, and really get on that so that we can get enough sleep. Women who claim to have poor sleep quality have more comorbidities. So that's all of the problems that I talked about on the first slide. The loss of sleep during this time usually contributes to weight gain and hunger. So like I said, if you knew that poor sleep was an issue for you, especially like maybe during that the week before your period when estrogen is coming down, like that week that you would have had PMS, then I would get right on that. I would try to make sure my sleep game was tight. I'd go to a doctor if I needed to, go to Dent, they have a great sleep clinic there. Maybe even get into some relaxation techniques, yoga, things like that. 14 reviews of studies. So a review usually means that you had to look at a whole bunch of studies that were done. So one study often gives us an idea about something and can point us in a direction. Usually you want to see more studies that investigate the same thing to give us an idea. And when you see a review, it means that there were a bunch of studies. So this is a review of 14 reviews of studies looking at sleep, looking at women postmenopausal who got less than 5 to 6 hours of sleep. And they found that it was positively correlated with a 25% more likelihood of being obese. So that's very powerful because that's a lot of data to have analyzed. And if we can sort of get better sleep quality by, addressing that on its own, and that's something that maybe we'll have a whole nother presentation about. But this is kind of what I meant. This topic is so big, it's hard to really touch everything. So this is something that will help keep the inflammation down, help keep the stress down, and then help with everything else, that sort of hormonal cascade. So from there, I will just reiterate that this lack of FSH, this will then contribute to lack of estrogen, and it can be traced back to all of those symptoms. So this is our very uphill battle that we have. What do we do about it? What do we do about it? So step one would be my advice, and I think the advice of every doctor, would be to make sure that if you haven't already established care with a gynecologist, that you do that. And you tell them every weird thing that's going on with you and your body. That doesn't matter what it is. They've seen all kinds of things. And oftentimes they can sort of help you or give you some guidance to manage that. I'm only going to talk about this very briefly because this is really a personal conversation that each one of us needs to have with our own doctor. But hormone replacement therapy, has been sort of all over the place in the news. I think a lot of people have sort of equated it to possibly having contributed to breast cancers, but then more research came out and said no. We know that it's very, very helpful for some women. And that's up for you and your doctor to determine. There are a lot of studies that show that as soon as you introduce exogenous, bioidentical estrogen again, that a lot of these symptoms seem to go away. There are some people that need to be on it for a long time, and there are some people that can get off of it right away. There are some people that it doesn't work for at all. There are people who don't have a lot of symptoms and they wouldn't need to go on it. So this is something that you can talk to. It's definitely a viable option to sort of help with these things. We know that it helps tick off every one of those boxes that we mentioned in the first place. So if you've had trouble sleeping, vasomotor symptoms, night sweats, if you're gaining weight, it can help with all of those things, but you want to make sure that you're a right candidate for it. It's not for everyone. So I won't go into all of the studies based on that. I'll just let you know that it's a good idea to have a good doctor and to talk to him or her about that. So the next slide is one of the studies. I have the heading on this one is the obesity and its effects on health in middle-aged women from the slums of Pune. So this title of this article really caught my eyes because some of the women that they were looking at had been malnourished 20 years previous to this. And it was one of these studies where we look at, well, is it our own fault that, our 50-plus-year-old women are obese? Is it their fault, or are they not exercising enough, or is there really something to this? And so no, it is not in your head. It's not your fault that your body is changing. You feel hungrier, less energetic, and that's something that all of these women who were malnourished, up to 20, 30 years ago. The poorest slums around the world, doctors have noticed that this is happening. So research has shown that establishing an exercise routine, I know you knew I was going to say this, is the best thing that you can do, okay? So something as simple as walking with friends. In fact, there's a whole group in British Columbia. I can't believe people are doing, would be a dream job. You're a PhD and all you do is get a bunch of menopausal women together and have a support group, and they go on walks together and you just write about it. That's basically their job. But it's awesome, it's great reading for me, and it's been very helpful for those women. Most of them I think were diabetic, and that's how they got into this group. But so they have a walking group, and it's British Columbia, so I think they mall walk, but it's been very beneficial to them. So how do we establish an exercise routine when we're tired? We know that we're less likely to burn fat and more likely to store it because of estrogen. And where do we go from there? So I'm going to talk about that. I have a lot of notes about how upset I was at reading these papers, so I apologize about the language these doctors were using. So behavioral science shows that establishing a routine is more effective than searching for motivation. Okay, you certainly can do a lot of things that are motivating. You can, make a playlist, you can, I like to, this is a stupid thing I do, but I like to use those crystals that make your laundry smell super good on my gym clothes so that I want to put them on. I have a lot of dumb things. But really having a routine, so having a group that you meet, signing up for a class that you go to, just putting it in your calendar is going to be much better for the long haul than just trying to get motivated. especially because it's an uphill battle. It's just something we have to get up and do every day. So partners are helpful, group exercise is helpful. You are looking for consistency and not just like one great workout, okay? Perspective is another good thing to do. So make exercise your me time. You want to consider it self-care, okay? This is what you're doing for you to stay healthy. And you'll actually find out that you feel way better when you're doing it. If you're doing the right kind of exercise. I mean, you don't have to go do anything crazy. And I'm going to talk about that in the next couple slides. When you feel like you don't have the energy, just keep to your commitment that you've already made. And you'd be amazed at how your body responds. So start slow and just keep to that commitment. So the next slide, we're going to talk about, where did it go? Oh, it's upside down here. The next slide, we're going to talk about how exercise ameliorates all of the menopause complaints. So I have a big chart here, and the first complaint was night sweats. And yes, exercise helps with that. Just don't exercise too close to bedtime, okay? And make sure that you drink a lot of fluids and that, you know, if you're doing something that's higher intensity, that it's earlier in the day. Hot flashes is the same thing. Wear loose clothing, bring cool water, do everything you can to keep yourself comfortable. And if you're noticing that you're having a lot of night sweats or hot flashes, you can do things like have a wet towel with maybe some like eucalyptus oil on it, and just use that like on the back of your neck, right in your upper back here. There's like we have something called brown fat that tends to produce more heat, and you can put it there, and that's pretty soothing. You can also just kind of tap down, maybe do like a gentler yoga or just an easier walk. It doesn't have to be things that kind of spark those feelings. Weight gain, yes, exercise helps weight gain. There's a lot of research that I looked at where we look at dose response. So dose response, that means how much exercise do I absolutely have to do to see an effect? And then does more than that help more or less, or, you know, so what do we need to do? And we're going to talk about that. So loss of bone density, yes, lifting weights is like one of the best things you can do, but even just doing like 20 minutes of walking helps stave off bone loss, and twice as much. So if you're to do 22 minutes a day of walking, it will help stave off bone loss. If you do 45 minutes of walking a day, you're gonna build more bone. So that's really important, and that was a significant difference in that study. So cardiovascular disease, yes, we reduce inflammation with exercise. Exercise is like it's like a pill that you just have to do. And it's a very powerful antioxidant. You start burning those fats that, remember how I said if your starter's broken because estrogen's not there? Well, you have a bypass with exercise. It's gonna go in there and it's gonna dig those lipids out. There might be days where you feel like it's harder to get at them, and that's fine, you just start slower. You build new muscle, and you burn fuel. So even with some kind of easier cardio, we see that people don't lose as much lean body mass. So if all you were to do, like let's just say you're gonna start at square one, all you can do is like muster 10 minutes to do some walking. It's not really enough to like hit that dose response, but it's enough so that you don't lose lean body mass, if that makes sense, as long as you do it consistently. It helps with fatigue, which is counterintuitive, I know, but yes, it does help with fatigue. Just listen to your body and sort of give it what it's asking for. So like if it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon and you still haven't exercised, and this is the only time you have to exercise, and it's the time you exercise every day, but it's your tired time, still do it, but just take the intensity down a notch. So let's say maybe you were a jogger. Let's just take it down and just go for a walk. But you still use that time for your exercise. Hypertension, certain cancers, possibly, depends on the kind of cancer. Cancers of the digestive tract, we know that exercise helps with that. And probably a lot of other ones, but the research is out. So basal metabolic rate, yes, and that is just increasing the amount of calories that your body burns while it's doing nothing. So you're building more muscle, you're going to build more calories. So that's just my little chart for all of the reasons why you'll want to exercise, because it's going to get rid of all of your problems that you have by just getting older. So now we'll talk about dose response. How much exercise is enough? So I've said this many, many times. Everybody kind of agrees that the magic number is 150 minutes a week. That's about 22 minutes a day. Okay? If you can commit to every day 22 minutes a day of doing something, you're good. Aerobic exercise, and this is aerobic exercise like walking, jogging, swimming, dance classes, anything where you're constantly moving. Your intensity should be so that you could, it could be higher, but you could be able to talk to somebody while you're doing it. You just couldn't sing a Whitney Houston song. You're moving too fast to sort of hold a note. And then you want to get about 2 to maybe 3 sessions of resistance training a week. This could take as little as 10 minutes, 15 minutes. It could be like band work. It could be just doing planks and push-ups. If you can't do push-ups from the floor and you're just building up your strength, you could just do them to the wall. It doesn't matter. You have to start somewhere. You could do them on your kitchen counter, on a desk. I think if I have time, I will run through a sun salutation. It's a really quick and easy sort of stretch to do. So yoga also counts. That would be a good way too. And yoga is uniquely helpful for maintaining flexibility, balance, and centeredness. What does that mean? So what I love about yoga is that it's been around for 3,000 years. We know, like yogis tell us all this stuff that it does, but scientists are like, oh, we're going to check and see that, just like they're going to check and see if menopause is a thing. So they check and see, and they're like, oh, this really does help with your balance and your circulation. This really does help as an antidepressant. So it does a lot of wonderful things. And we know that like it actually can help with staving off dementia in people that have already started exhibiting signs of dementia. Especially even if you're not doing yoga, but you're just doing single arm exercises one side to the other, practice standing on one foot, that stuff is all good for your brain too. And I'll talk a little bit more about yoga as we go on. So let's find our next slide. Doesn't want to go. Okay. And we'll just go step by step. So what does your exercise routine look like? You start by warming up. So you start with some stretches. Like maybe you want to just, pretend you're like your cat that never gets up without stretching. You just start sending your hips back, stretching your hip flexors, your hamstrings. Maybe you just want to walk for 10 minutes. Maybe you want to just run through some sun salutations. So you can do these. I think this is a nice thing to show you. And then you could Google it, you could look at it on YouTube. And you can do it even if you've got knee replacements. I'll show you a really easy modification, but it warms you up and it kind of quiets your mind and brings you to your center. So I'm just going to use this table here. Can you see the table? Okay, so I'm going to use this table, and at home you could use a desk. You would just walk right on up to it, and we are going to start with something called a mountain pose. So what I'll have you do is just kind of rock back and forth on your toes, on your feet, until you find balance. And then we're going to stop, roll our shoulders back, sit them down nice and tight, pretend your arms are heavy. Find squareness in your hips, balance left to right, front to back. Chin is in, somebody's pulling your skull up towards the ceiling. And from there, we'll just take a deep breath, hands to your neck. Inhale, reach on up. hinge at the hip, exhale, and you can put your hands on your desk, hips go back. We're starting to stretch the hamstrings. And this is where it starts to get interesting. You're gonna take you're arched up, and then we're gonna start letting yourself fall forward. So spine relaxes. You want to feel like a rag doll. If you are comfortable and have balance, you could just grab your elbows and hang. Once we are here, we're going to start going into a lungy position. So you can take 1 foot forward and 1 foot back. Get a big stretch through the back leg, big stretch through its hip. Crown towards the ceiling. Step both legs back, and we're just going to hold a plank. Arch your back up, drive your hips back. So here I'm going to move the table, but you would push your head through your arms and then pull back to standing. So that's a really quick and simple way to warm up. You can Google that. Sometimes they call it Surya Namaskar A, or just a sun salutation. And it really, you want to run through it a couple times. It shouldn't take more than a few seconds, but it will strengthen your muscles. It will make them more flexible. People who do this tend to have more pliability in their muscles, which means that you're less likely to hurt them when you're doing other things. So let's say you're going to play tennis or something like that with your friends. It makes you sort of more difficult to injure. It also quiets your mind. So I talked a lot when I was going through it, but when you are doing it, you're always thinking about being in your body. So that's a really great way of just warming up. It's a really great way to just incorporate maybe 5 to 7 minutes of strength into your 22-minute workout. And you really don't have to do a lot more than that. It's really enough. So I just wanted to kind of introduce that to you, because I think sometimes people think yoga is about doing hard things, but yoga is really about finding a center, getting stronger, finding your breath, and it's good exercise. So once you've got your warm-up, then you want to make sure that you're performing some sort of aerobic activity a day. Make sure that it's at an intensity that where you can't sing for 22 of those minutes. So if you're walking and maybe you could sing, you can still call that activity, but it's not really exercise. Next, you want to think about incorporating some resistance work. So if you've got that sun salutation in there, some days that might be enough for you. Other days you might want to try a weightlifting class or even Tai Chi. There's all sorts of things out there, and by all means have at it. What I do love about yoga also is that on the psychological side of things, that it has shown to sort of ameliorate a lot of the anxiety and psychological symptoms that come along with menopause. So we will go to cognitive behavioral therapy. So now that we've sort of left, and remember, we're under the umbrella of stress and inflammation, so we know that just exercise helps inflammation, helps with stress, but yoga particularly does. And so now we're going to continue with decreasing stress. We're talking about cognitive behavioral therapy. So this really isn't my forte, and it's sometimes, I think, misconstrued when we tell people, oh, just try therapy, because it implies that maybe there's something wrong with you. But this is really, you want to think of as more of a tool in your toolbox. So it's a set of strategies including goal setting, problem solving. If you want to get around something like emotional eating, you could use it for that. Stimulus control, relapse prevention. So it helps with a lot of issues. Part of entering this new phase of our lives comes with feelings of being out of control, frustration, brain fog, anxiety. And CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, can help with just modifying, just maybe reframing how we think about something. Okay, first and foremost, it's great for that. It can reduce unhealthy behaviors. It can help our self-regulation. It can help us adhere to activities that we want to do and we know are healthy. And it has been proven to be a really successful way at helping people transition through this part of life. So you don't want to think of this as like a negative or something to like patch up something that's negative. This is really a tool to like send you somewhere positive and just to make this transition as good as it can possibly be. And the only reason I even know about it is because I read about a lot of protocols that doctors have used, and this as a part of the protocol, along with things like yoga and exercise, have been quite successful at keeping all of those that first slide that I showed you, all of those things down. So don't be afraid of it, embrace it. There are the kind of people you would want to look for if you are going to do something privately would be like a licensed social worker, a psychologist, or a psychiatrist. You can call a place like, or online, I think there's something called BetterHelp. I know that they could do everything over online with you, but it's something that you could look into on your own. I'll go into some nutrition, and this is something I could do like a whole entire presentation on, and it probably will. We're going to talk about nutrition for inflammation and for cravings. So the green Mediterranean diet is one of the sort of best ones that we could do right now. So we know the Mediterranean diet is fantastic. The green Mediterranean diet, believe it or not, has been shown to decrease visceral fat twice as much. So people lost twice as much fat on the green Mediterranean diet. And the only difference between that and the Mediterranean is that they drank a lot of green tea. They did a protein shake that was made out of plants called duckweed, and they had like a handful of walnuts every day. So interesting. So that's a really good one, and I'm just going to go over a few pointers. Volumetrics is another great one if you wanted to try an established diet. The DASH diet's a great one because that one's just for diabetes and hypertension, which is goes along with the sort of loss of estrogen. So basically all of these diets will have you doing things like snacking on foods that are high in nutrients like vitamins, minerals, other plant things that we know are healthy for us, like veggies, fruits, fresh fruits, bean dips, like beans all day long. Beans are chock full of a carbohydrate that will give us energy but not increase our blood sugar too much. They're full of fiber. They are full of lean protein and very little fat, so they are good to go. Look for lean protein. So the lean protein, without getting enough lean protein, our body is not going to make new muscle. So lean proteins, things like eggs, fish, turkey, beans again, tofu, things like that. One thing you want to limit, we want to talk about, is caffeine. So caffeine, while we know it's really healthy for us, it actually helps with heart disease and cancers. If we've got any kind of sleep trouble, caffeine will stay in your body for up to 13 hours. So maybe limit it to like no caffeine after noon or no caffeine after 10 if you're really susceptible to its ability to keep you up. Also, caffeine looks like, in our body, it kind of looks like something that makes your heart want to start racing, and that's kind of what happens to us, right? So it looks like what we would call something that's like an adrenergic drug or like adrenaline. That's the word I was looking for. So to have, if you're one of the people who I'll drink like 8 cups of coffee a day, it could really take its toll on our sort of stress response. Because your body, that adrenaline is really how we respond to like seeing a lion that's chasing after us. And it's kind of gives us a really huge tingly sort of stress response. So a lot of that, some people think it could cause your adrenaline sort of system to fatigue, adrenal fatigue. And other people sort of, so that is one viable option. And the other thing is that it's just sort of always sets you in this sort of stress mode so that it's harder to calm down. So I'm definitely for still having your coffee in the morning or still having tea, but making sure we limit that. The last thing I'll talk about in terms of nutrition for today is keeping your fats healthy and whole. So healthy fats are really good at keeping inflammation down. And they're also really good because they help us to build new cells. So things like grass-fed butter. Grass-fed butter just has more omega-3 fats in it, which is a really powerful antioxidant. Extra virgin olive oil, whole avocados, whole nuts, whole olives, flax seeds, chia seeds, things like that. Really, really good for us. And so after nutrition, I'm kind of going to wrap up there. I just want to make sure that we touch on how exercise and nutrition can help and ways to get those kind of built into your calendar. So women who belong to menopause-aged walking groups or exercise groups have fewer comorbidities. So finding that support system is great. You can look for them at, work, maybe in a retirement community, at church, your own family, a local wellness center like the Y is great. They're fantastic. Program through your insurance company like Silver Sneakers, your local senior centers, yoga studios. I can't say enough good things about yoga and like Tai Chi. I think they really are a way to comprehensively get exercise, strength training, just have some self-care, me time, stress reduction. So yoga would be great as well. So get a team behind you, keep the stress down. This is more about keeping stress down. So your exercise doesn't need to be crazy and CrossFit-y. It needs to just be your self-care and your me time. And that's that. So we'll let you go there.